Hey everyone, welcome back. It's Reese, and it's the holiday season, and you know what that means? Wow, Reese, Jesus? Yes, Jesus. So let's talk about the Christian persecution complex. And before you guys boo, my mom's a chaplain, and she laughed when I told her that joke. So we're good. It's mom approved. So I'm Reese. This is Reese Gray Analyzes, and I'm so excited that you guys decided to adventure with me today. On Reese Gray Analyzes, we dive into creations and experiences in art, media, music, and even video games to unravel why we think the way we do, question what we believe, and learn something new. Now, I do want to bring up that I'm aware that Christianity has faced significant persecution presently in different countries, and historically, in the Roman Empire and stuff, and that's true. I'm not trying to say that that's not true. And even in places like the Philippines and stuff, missionaries, there were these Methodist missionaries who were just denied visa status and just not allowed back in the country, and that was based off of religion, right? So I do understand that these things happen, and they do happen to Christians. So I'm just interested in the way that it works in these more Western societies where they are the more dominant group. I think it's really crucial to have this type of awareness that in the United States, at least 70% of the population identifies as Christian, and I'll leave my sources in the description as well. But Christian religions, basically, they are all inclusive, kind of the Catholic, Christian, Methodist, Nazarene. It encompasses a lot of different things, even though there is supposed to be a separation of church and state. A lot of laws and cultural norms can kind of be based upon Christian morals and values, kind of with the cultural norm thing. Even something that my mom, a chaplain, will say, she admits that her whole work calendar and holiday calendar is based off of Christian holidays, Christmas, they get off, Easter and stuff, all of that is based off of religious practices of the majority of the country. Having a nod to that, that doesn't have to be an inherently bad or good thing. It's just the reality of it. So I think just having a nod to that's the reality of where being Christian and the privileges of that comes from. And now, since it's established that in the US at least, and I am gonna keep saying US because I know it's going to be very widely from country to country. So how does a group with so much cultural significance in a country still end up feeling persecuted in that same country? And that phenomena is something that's super interesting to me, and what made me make this video, because I think growing up in a Nazarene church especially, and I know every church is different too, but ours focused a lot on victimization and othering, and that it's not safe to be a Christian, and that's something that I always felt really weird about. And so in my experience, that's just my experience, and if people have different experiences, that's totally fine too. I wanted to kind of delve into that complex relationship between still being the majority and that importance of feeling victimized and persecuted. So what I learned too, and I'm gonna pull up my notes here, is that this Christian persecution complex isn't merely a response to external criticism, but it involves a psychological element where believers may internalize these feelings as a form of identity. So there's a sociologist, Emil Durkheim, and that sociologist has a concept of collective consciousness that may offer a lot of insight on the Christian persecution complex. So it's suggested that shared beliefs and values contribute to a type of social cohesion. And in the Bible too, there is a lot of persecution, and people of certain churches, want to feel closer to that. And so they take on this victimhood mentality in order in order to be closer to the text. But however, when a dominant group feels threatened, you know, it can lead to a redefinition of that like collective identity. And you might be like, how are Christians like threatened in the United States? And, you know, hearing a lot of people talk about like Christianity at church. And if you're at like a church that like victimizes Christianity, I really think that you'll understand where I'm coming from here, that Christians in my church, you know, not everybody's church, but they do feel like their morals are threatened because of like the LGBTQ community and like the pledge allegiance at schools not being mandatory, and they believe it's because of the line like one nation under God that's in the Pledge of Allegiance, and they just believe that they're like being censored and that the Christian values of the nation is like being washed away in favor of diversity. So this majority group does feel threatened because they are the dominant group, and in the name of diversity, like things aren't like being mandatory anymore, like the pledge. And I know that sounds like really, really small, but I have seen people get so passionate about these issues, which is why like I really wanted to look up like stuff that had to do with this mentality of Christian persecution, because I've seen how deeply it affects people's identity and their lives and the choices that they make. So going on with this sociologist's study, they say that the feelings of persecution arises in part from a perceived erosion of the privileged status. And I just think that's so interesting because a lot of Christians too, in the large Christian community like that I grew up in, and I moved a lot to like overseas as well, and it might be the kind of churches that like the adults around me picked that skewed my own perception of like Christian persecution. But I did notice that it was a huge theme. There was like always this danger of like Christianity, like their right to practice Christianity being taken away from them. Like the people who do admit that like, yes, they're the majority, like they don't have this same like sense of fear that other people do of their rights being taken away, which I find like really interesting. Like the people who are more like grounded in the reality of their situation are less likely to act out of like this fear. So whether this fear lies in like factual reality or not, this feeling, this sentiment and this fear still really affects the way that people move about the world and treat others. So that's why I'm really wary to like look at certain like extremist groups or something and be like, oh, they're just stupid, because sure, their beliefs aren't like grounded in like this reality, but it's those types of people who are most determined to enact on their fear, you know, and like be like violent and like hurt others. Like the people who are like more extreme and that people write off, like I just feel like it's not taken seriously and it should be taken seriously. So going on with this study, this like perceived loss of privileged status can create a complex where like real changes in like cultural norms, like the legislation of same-sex marriage being enacted, can lead to like threats of the country's morals shifting with like rights of abortion and rights to marriage. Marriage and abortion aren't phenomena that directly affect a Christian person because it's another person's marriage and another person's body. Like, I just find it interesting that Christians feel like their beliefs are being compromised through decisions that are not made by them. I'm not trying to play an us versus them game, but in that case, I do have to say that like Christianity being oppressed in the US specifically, I just feel like it's a perception of persecution and not actual persecution in the case of like contraceptives and like the LGBTQ movement. Like, what? I think a lot of Christian persecution as well is like backed up sometimes like by the media as well. Like growing up in the church too, like we all remember all of the Christian like films that had like heavy victimization themes. A really popular one too is like God's Not Dead as well, where like a student was vilified for like believing in the fact that, you know, he believed that, you know, in Abrahamic religions that God died on the cross for our sins and will like rise again, right? So he's not dead, and someone stood up for that in class. And then too, with that really interesting like war on Christmas type of narrative too, where people are really mad that, you know, to be more inclusive, they say happy holidays instead of Merry Christmas, but you could still say Merry Christmas. Like, it's not a big deal, but then like people make it a big deal out of nowhere. So I think like popular media too playing into these victimhood narratives really helps the fact that people do feel like this Christian persecution thing is real. And I think when people like get focused on like the war on Christmas, so like saying happy holidays, like when you get into this like hive mind of people who like all think the same way and like just highlight all of those instances instead of like looking at various points of view, it kind of leads to this like self-fulfilling prophecy that like you just believe what you want to believe and then just look at the things that prove the things you want to believe and nothing else. And so you kind of get stuck into this like circular thinking, right? This is what I saw like in a lot of people like at church. Like they just grasp onto any little fact and just like run with it and not try and like question anything after that. I just find it really interesting how things that like validate their victimhood are held on so tightly. I also think like the rise of like cancel culture too has like made some Christians feel like this validation towards like victimhood too, because like they're like not allowed to say anything. And these debates around like freedom of speech, a lot of the time we don't want to perpetuate any type of hostility towards people who think differently than us, but we also don't want dangerous misinformation narratives to be prevalent within a society. And I think like as Americans, we like don't have a agreement. We don't have an agreement on what reality is. I think that's just so interesting, right? Like it's just like the stakes have just like become so extreme, right? That like political debates like around issues like healthcare and education, where people can have like different views on how problems should be solved, but instead of coming together to find solutions, there's like this demonization of each side. Like no matter what somebody believes, it's just, if it's not the same thing that you believe, it's just wrong and demonized, which isn't the way that like, you know, people are widely in real life, like if you talk to somebody, but it's just like the way that media has seemed to work, because like, you know, rage bait and really like strong opinions and stuff. I think since those things are more clickable, it just seems like that's how the world is. But it's not a correct depiction of how the world is, but it's a correct depiction of the things that people want to interact with on the internet for entertainment value. And I just think that in itself is really interesting too. Like it's just like a really weird and interesting phenomena. And, you know, because people are like so isolated and we're able to interact more with people online than we are like with each other, I think people are under this assumption that the world works in a certain way because of what they see online. I know this like I'm like going down this rabbit hole, but like the point of me making this video was trying to like navigate through like what we could do, like how an individual can act act in order to like feel like someone who does have a different view than them, like they're not like an enemy, right? And like that's something that's really been on my mind, because sometimes it's difficult to have like conversations and stuff with my family because of their like extreme like religion beliefs. And like I do deeply want to have like these like conversations with like extremely religious family members and stuff, and like understand what they say, and I want to be understood for what I say too. So the point of this video was really to try and understand like this victimhood and persecution that, you know, people around me feel so deeply, and understand it and come at it with empathy so that I can have more constructive conversations with people I disagree with. So this isn't like a us versus them type of debate, or like trying to change someone's views. It's just trying to understand others in a way that, you know, can help me understand myself, and then hopefully find some answers on how to like we can be better humans to each other, to like coexist happily in a world where like we're able to make the best decisions for ourselves. And I was trying to think like, what is the answer to that? Like, is there like something that an outside person can do? Like if someone feels so persecuted as a Christian, and it like affects so deeply like the way they move about their own world, like is there something that I can do for that? And the answer is like no, but I think like encouragement of like critical self-reflection is something that can be like suggested like in a loving way, and is probably that self-reflection is the only way. Unless someone has that, they're not like able to have a conversation with you. The more extreme the belief is, the more angry they get like at you too, because they're afraid for you too, because they like just want you to believe what they believe, because then your soul will be saved too. So the stakes are like so high for these people with like these deep set fear-based victimhood like Christian beliefs. And I just like, I don't know. I think the shared value too, like with these people who have these like deep set Christian beliefs too, is that we all want to love each other, right? I don't know. And so even though I don't have the answers, like in this video, I just kind of wanted to like talk about it. And I really enjoyed how people were able to have really excellent conversations like in my Bo Burnham video too, and I just like kind of wanted to have a conversation about this too. Yeah, because I can like throw academic articles and facts and stuff out there as much as I want, but in the end with like, you know, people who are extremely religious and fanatic, like an article isn't going to change their mind, a fact isn't going to change their mind. What matters most to them is how they feel. And what matters most to others too, who aren't like very religious too, it's like how they feel, and like how do we deal with all of those feelings. I don't know. It's tough, right? And so like if you guys have like any suggestions on how you're like dealing with this like weird area in life, I don't know. Or anyone who's like grew up really religious and then since left the church, like I'd love to have a conversation. My Instagram, my blue sky, is linked in the description. And yeah. Love you. Bye. Oh.